Welcome to the Chinese Canadian Museum's podcast, The School Room. I'm your host, Melissa Lee, CEO of the museum. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are thrilled to have the multi-talented Rainbow Chan on our podcast. Rainbow Chan is an award-winning vocalist, producer, DJ, and visual artist. Both heartbreaking and tender, her idiosyncratic brand of pop reflect diasporic experiences and deeply personal tales of love and loss. Rainbow has performed at several renowned venues and festivals, including the Sydney Opera House, Vivid, Mona, FOMA, Gallery of Modern Art, Iceland Airwaves, National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts, and Daegun in Hong Kong, where I met her. Rainbow, hi. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here in hot Australia. It's really wonderful that we could sit here at 4A Contemporary Art Space, where I understand you're a board member, and we can learn a little bit more about the Chinese Australian diaspora through your work.
Yeah.
Why don't we just get started? So maybe we could talk a little bit about your family history and identity, because I understand that informs a lot of your creative practice.
Yeah, so I was born in Hong Kong and my family and I migrated to Australia in 1996 when I was 6 years old. And during that time, growing up in Australia, I felt very torn about my identity. I wanted to blend in and fit in with everybody and assimilate to so-called Australian white culture. And then it was only later on in my adult years that I started to unpack a lot of that internalized racism and shame and rediscover, I guess, a love for my cultural heritage and in a very nuanced way as well, and one where I continually explore the idea of agency and self-determination. Yeah, I guess living in a diasporic context has helped me see the world with sort of a different lens that's not about originality or authenticity, but always challenging those things. So I guess that kind of sums up the underpinning notion of my practice and my worldview. And I still have a lot of family in Hong Kong. So again, I kind of live between two homes, but it took me a while to accept that I have a home in Hong Kong as well.
And what are your earliest memories of Hong Kong that you kept with you while growing up in Australia?
My love for Aaron Kwok, God for sake. My love for Cantonese pop music was strong. Even as a kid, I just loved his music and his video clips and his dance moves and his amazing hairstyles. And I think when we moved to Australia, before we had, internet connection and easily able to access films and everything, we brought over this one box full of our cassette tapes or VHS tapes, and mine was just full of Aaron Kwok songs, and that's what I really held on to as my little treasure box of Hong Kong and what it means to me. And of course there's the food and family, but I think something that's really personal are these particular songs by Aaron Kwok that just immediately gives me a very nostalgic feeling of being a young kid in Hong Kong watching TV.
Aaron Kwok, God for saying, at that time in his heyday where he was the most famous, you probably were a little kid. So was that a kind of fame or community that you learned about from your parents or your parents' friends at the time in Sydney? Do you remember, was it just really popular in your family or your family friends and relatives?
I distinctly remember him when I was still in Hong Kong. But my mum actually claims that my first words were a Gofuseng song and not her name. She's just you didn't say mum, you said his words, his lyrics. And there's this very funny picture of me that my family has in the house of I must be 2 years old or 3 years old, hardly have any hair on my head, but I have this Aaron Kwok t-shirt on, and I used to go around to everyone and say, "Don't call me Rainbow, call me Mrs. Kwok." Kwok Thai, Kwok Thai. So I think like that definitely was already in my memory. But yeah, coming over to Australia, then it was perpetuated by this fantasy of like, this is what home was. And also like my parents listened to well, my parents didn't really like his music that much. They were more into the oldies like Tan Lai Guan, Teresa Tang, and like slightly older generation. But I have two older sisters, and they also listen to like more like the Four Heavenly Kings, you know. My sisters actually have really big age gaps with me, and I have a little younger sister as well. So within that one household, there was very different experiences of that point of migrating to Australia. Like my elder sister was 18, 19, so had finished school but came to Australia and then had to do high school last 2 years again to go into uni here. So she was an adult basically, but you know, my younger sister was 3 years old. So yeah, within that one family, there was very extremely different understandings of what it meant to move and connecting, disconnecting, all that kind of things.
And what was it like growing up as a Chinese Australian in Sydney? What did it feel like? What was your community? Was there a kind of general connection to Hong Kong, or was it really different or mixed specifically? I don't know, the quintessential Chinese Australian experience from your point of view.
Yeah, well, I think my family moved to a predominantly white area. So for our own experiences, I felt quite alienated in a way that I wasn't surrounded by lots of Asian people. Well, this is in the 90s, and we had to go into Chinatown, which is where we're sitting at the moment, to experience those feelings of home. It wasn't in our everyday because we'd probably only travel into the city maybe once a week. My parents own a Chinese restaurant, so they have to go to Chinatown to pick up their groceries because back then, again, like all the Chinese stores and stuff wasn't as prevalent like in the suburbs. So we had to travel into the city centre to get all the ingredients. And so it was like a once a week excursion that I'd feel like, oh yeah, there's all the Chinese people. But then at school, like my cousin and I were the only Chinese people in an entire school for many, many years. The landscape has shifted significantly now, and there's a lot of Chinese students and families in particular in that area. But yeah, back then in the 90s, I definitely felt very different to all the other people around.
What was the name of your parents' Chinese restaurant?
Okay, they might get sued for this, but it was actually Cho Bar, which is, you know, the chain store in Hong Kong. But it's actually because my mum's name is Cho and my dad's name is Wa, so they combined it. Yeah, Cho Wa.
So that's so interesting. And also for me, when I think about this yearning for home or Hong Kong, I think it's really a way that diasporic immigrants, when they start in a new country, they reference that famous place in Hong Kong. So because in Vancouver, there was a very famous bakery, and the name of the bakery was the name of a famous Keiwa. It was a very famous bakery in Hong Kong that's still around. Also, I think this idea when you have Hong Kong restaurant or Beijing restaurant or the Great Wall restaurant and you have it in Canada or Australia, it really is hearkening back to their idea of nostalgic home or just kind of keeping that close to your heart, which I think is so nice and prevalent in your work when I listen to your music.
Oh, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your 2021 EP Stanley? We talked about Sing and how you love Cantopop, so maybe we can move into your own work and how it references Cantopop.
So I am a singer and producer, and have been working in the pop music realm as a touring and recording artist for over a decade. When I wrote Stanley in 2020 to 2021, it was during I guess, the height of COVID lockdowns. And in that year, 2020, I was supposed to travel back to Hong Kong quite a few times for research and for family reasons. But of course, everyone was found. And so I became very nostalgic for Hong Kong, and spending so much time at home also, it made me listen to a particular type of music. I was listening to a lot to like Teresa Tang, my mum's favorite singer, and of a slightly older generation yet again, I think. And it was because of, I guess there was something about looking to the past and this very particular style of music, this genre, which was the background to my upbringing here as well. My mum would put it on in the background when she was cooking. And I think Teresa Tang's voice, there's just something really sweet, but at the same time sad about it. Someone once described her voice as 7 parts sweetness, 3 parts tears. And so for me, that somehow really encapsulated the headspace I was in during COVID lockdowns. And I wanted to emulate that style of music as an ode, or as almost like a farewell letter to Hong Kong. And I was watching a lot of Wong Kar-wai at the same time as well. And I think that that fantasy nostalgic world really accumulated and became the palette of this record. So essentially what I tried to do was write songs that if I had the chops to write it in Cantonese or Mandarin, it would be, but I don't have the mastery over the language to do that. So I wrote English style songs in like how I imagine if a Mandopop or Cantopop singer would sing it from the 60s.
So much of Canto Mandopop is not original music. So a lot of it is maybe taken from Japanese songs or taken from English songs in the 80s. And what's really evocative and important about that genre is the singing. It's not about original creativity of the lyrics or the music. So I feel like that's super interesting that you are taking that Cantonese Mandopop and kind of transforming it into English. So I feel like it's still very much of that style. And the other thing is, you were saying that your Cantonese or Mandarin isn't good enough to have that song in Chinese or write it. So many of those Cantopop stars actually were born or grew up in the West, right? I'm thinking of Sally Ye as well, who grew up in Victoria in BC. And I'm also thinking of Joyce Chen, who was born in Vancouver.
Yeah, and have to use English phonetics to spell out the Chinese sounds, right?
Exactly. And I think the story with Sally, is her husband, George Lamb, helped her spell it out.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's me frantically texting my sister on WhatsApp being like, "Am I saying this correctly? Am I saying this?" Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, yeah, and I think that that's quite interesting too, is within pop music, there is this, I guess, a yearning to also look globally as well. And I think maybe during this period of a prosperous music industry in Hong Kong, it was very global, and they borrowed styles from all around and kind of made these hybrid pop songs, which is what I love doing, because I think growing up between cultures, I was constantly getting information from different, well, you would think disparate kind of contexts, but it all makes sense to me. Like I could listen to Dan Lai Guan 1 minute, next minute I would be singing Britney Spears, and it was just everything, like time and space was kind of a collage for me. And so I think Stanley, this record, is an ode to that, and in fact it is amplifying that as a strategy to explore, not only I wanted to write really cheesy, over the top love songs and these ballads, but at the same time, if I look back into the history of Teresa Tang, she was, for a long time, her music was banned in mainland China, and there are these political resonances around her as an icon, as a figure, being weaponized by different kind of stakeholders. And so I started to think about music and what we think might be trivial as a way to express hidden feelings or what you can't say overtly. And so these songs, in a way, kind of acted like that too in a moment in time when the world was really disrupted through COVID and there were a lot of changes happening all around the world, and particularly in Hong Kong.
Can you tell us what Stanley stands for?
Everyone's like, who's Stanley? I want to know about this person. Stanley is actually a reference to this tourist beach.
Yes, in Hong Kong.
Yes. And for me, it is an interesting place because my parents in the 80s owned a jeans clothing store, boutique, and they would go to Stanley to get their stock. And so in my own, again, family history, there's this nostalgic, mythologized reference to this place, again, back in its heyday. But now it's a bit dated, you know, if you go there. I think they've renovated a lot of it, but there was a period where things kind of look like a faded postcard. Yeah, and I think that's what I started to think about in these songs as well. It's like something that's had a former glory and then it's, you know, but the paint is starting to flake or everything's been sun bleached, and that grappling with change, I guess.
It really was in Hong Kong, I think, a very tourist type place to go in the 80s and 90s. And you're right, it's a little bit faded now. I'm just thinking of those winding streets with the shops and everything that were really kind of important back in the 80s and 90s. And it was like a very almost wealthy area, or you'd have seafood. And now there are other places that have taken that over. Do you want to talk a little bit about the indigenous Hong Kong part of your creative practice? Maybe a little bit about the Weitou people?
So for the last 5 years, I've been looking into, well, actually, looking into sounds very surface. I've been rigorously researching the music of Weitou women who I have connection to through my mum. My mum is Weitou, and in fact, her lineage can be traced back to the first family that settled in Hong Kong, the Tang clan.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, so that's actually where I first met you.
Yes.
When I was visiting an artist that was part of the Tang clan, Dang Guahin, and then we talked and you mentioned that your lineage is also part of the Tang clan.
Yeah, through my maternal grandmother. Supposedly the ancestor is a princess. Yeah,
Right.
so
Yes.
Song Dynasty empress. So in the ancestral hall in the Tang Longyatao village, you can actually see on one of the tablets, the ancestral tablets, a dragon's head, and that is in tribute to the princess. So yeah, my journey on rediscovering these songs all started because, again, yeah, as I was referencing before, growing up in Australia, it was hard enough for my parents to get us to speak Cantonese, and I started to think about mum's mother tongue, Waitawa, and how, you know, it was once the most spoken language in Hong Kong before, like, British colonization.
Oh,
right?
really?
Yeah, it could, because, like, for people who don't know, Waitao people were the first settlers of Hong Kong who migrated there from southern China and settled in the New Territories, or what's now known as the New Territories, in the Song Dynasty, like 900 AD. And then they were agrarians, so they were farmers, and then it was only centuries later that the Hakka and the other indigenous clans came. So Weitou people have a very long history in
Fascinating.
Hong Kong. Yes, yeah, it is. And people don't know about this. People don't realize the villages have been there for a very long time. And so Waitawa, my mum's mother tongue, the language of Weitou people, was, yeah, once the dominant language. And then within like 2 generations, it's on the brink of disappearance. And while it is quite similar to Cantonese, that's also after many years of cross kind of cultural assimilating and words kind of disappearing out. But it's still its own very distinct language with its idiosyncrasies and syntax, you know, and slang. And my mum didn't pass it on to us because when she was growing up, she also felt very stigmatized with speaking Waitawa. When she went to school, the teachers, you know, forced everyone to speak Cantonese. If you speak the Henghawa, they say, like, it's looked down upon. And so, yeah, she was quite self-conscious. And I would just hear it every now and then on the phone when we were growing up, when my mum was speaking to her sisters on the phone, and if there was something they just couldn't express in any other way, they'd like lapse into Waitawa and start laughing and, have all these in-jokes. And gosh, I thought, if I don't ask this question now of asking mum to teach me some words, it's going to just disappear. Like there's hardly any young people learning this. And so my mum, number one, was quite shocked that I was even interested. And then number two, she had heard about this community development project that was happening in Hong Kong, in Long Yatao, one of the villages that sort of borders Shenzhen. This community development project had been working with really elderly Weitou women who in the 80s and 90s to document not only Weitou language, but actually Weitou songs by women, and particularly ritual songs. And at that point, that's all she knew. She just kind of connected me up with these people. And then in 2018, I flew back to Hong Kong and met this beautiful, beautiful group of women and the social workers who have supported this project. And they welcomed me into the space, put a Weitou hat on my head and said, "You're one of us," and was so excited to see me.
What's a Weitou hat?
Well, I think the colonial name is coolie hat. So it's a hat that is, if you imagine it like a donut, but flat, made out of bamboo. It's got a hole in the middle so your head can be ventilated. And then on the rim of this really big bamboo hat is a black fabric that shades you from the sun, but also from like insects. And each woman would have this hat to go out into the farm. And they would also they would hand weave a string or a tassel to tie the hat to their head. And the strings would actually have hidden encrypted messages.
Wow.
On them, yeah, like symbols and stuff for different wishes, but also sometimes they always, like the grannies tell me, oh, it's because everyone's wearing the same clothes, everyone's wearing the same kind of farming clothes. And the tassel, the hand-woven tassel, was your only way to differentiate yourself from others. So people used it as a fashion statement. People were like came up with different techniques to weave certain patterns that other people couldn't replicate, or they'd like find a particular color with, dyeing it with a particular plant. And also they would give it to each other as gifts as well. That was kind of like their currency. There's just so much rich history from these women, which is completely not known about. It's not mainstream knowledge, and even the documentation of it for a very long time has been from a very colonial anthropological perspective. Like there's articles written by a lot of European, like British sort of researchers from 60s and 70s, 80s, but it hasn't really come from the community itself until very, very recently, when this development project started. And the women and the social workers have worked together to create like CDs. They created a documentary, which we actually showed at Baigun. They've done weaving workshops, they've done rice harvesting workshops, and they've also just released a weaving book actually that has won an award. And my kind of collaboration or participation in all this is I've flown back many times over the last 5 years now to learn the songs, from the women's mouths directly, have lunch with them, sit with them, interview them. I made a documentary in 2019 documenting their stories and my journey of reconnecting and how it's brought me closer to my mum. And in this big project, I have also written my own album of Weitou inspired songs. Specifically, the ritual songs that I was referring to earlier is called the Bridal Laments. Now you might ask, why would a bride be singing laments? Shouldn't like marriage, weddings be a happy thing? Oh no, back in those days, the women described it to me as marriage was a kind of death. And I was like, oh, okay, do tell me more. So historically in the villages, and this was quite common practice across Asia for a long time and still is in some countries, the marriages were arranged.
Right.
So the young girls in the village would not even see their husband literally until the moment he lifts the veil on the wedding day.
Right, and in Chinese culture, the veil is not see-through the way it is in Western culture. What's a veil? It's
Yeah,
it's
opaque.
literally
It's a cloth.
it's a red silk cloth that you cannot see through, and if you're the bride, you can only peek through the gaps off the side, right?
Yeah. So it's like definitely, yeah, it just to me, that whole gesture as well is just really kind of creating those power dynamics of
Of
like,
course.
okay, the woman has literally no choice. This whole arrangement is orchestrated by a matchmaker and then the parents as well. And, for them, there's a transaction there as well. So for girls, marrying out was really sad because also once they married into the groom's village, they were often treated very harshly by the husband and the mother-in-law, then also expected to have lots of kids, boys in particular. You got to have a male heir and you got to work and you got to breastfeed, you got to do like everything while at the same time be emotionally and spiritually cut off from your home.
Right, because in Chinese culture, part of the reason why you wanna have sons is because if you have daughters, when they marry, they go into another family. You actually leave your family and join your husband's family.
Yeah.
So you lose a daughter. You always lose a daughter, and you always when you have a son, you actually gain a daughter-in-law.
Yeah. Like if you're a woman, you basically are a temporary resident of your home until you marry out. So yeah, I mean, I've heard so many of these grannies tell me like, oh yes, my father thought I was a burden, or when one granny told me that she will never forget the moment she gave birth to a daughter and her husband and her mother-in-law refused to visit her in hospital, which is just devastating. And that, it's not even, it's kind of recent memory still. It's within, these couple of generations. So back to these arranged marriages, basically there was a ritual that what happened before the wedding day. 3 days, can sometimes even go up to 10 days. But usually 3 days before the wedding day, the bride-to-be will actually do a ritual called the bridal lament, or hokkago, where she would sing and actually weep and wail for 3 days and 3 nights in front of her family and friends as a way to say goodbye. And these songs have been passed down to her from older women in her village, and she has learnt these songs since she was a very, very young girl in these women-only spaces called sister houses. Usually a widow in the village would teach the girls these songs, and in exchange the girls would look after the widow by getting the firewood or the water from the well. So it was this very special female sort of solidarity situation, but at the same time they were bonding over this really traumatic thing that each girl was expected to go through. And the songs, much to my surprise, was actually very defiant. Even though the fate has been sealed for her and she knows she has to go through this, the lyrics are angry. They're angry, they're harrowing, they are full of protest and just trying to, carve out some sort of agency and sense of self in that liminal space of those 3 days where she can just vent out all her anger, all her rage.
Can you give us an example?
Do you want me to sing a bit?
Yes, please.
This is a song called Fish Song, Bird Song. The bride uses various distinct characteristics of fish and bird to describe her pain. So I would sing a verse. Tháng sa tinh thọ quay cắm nhĩ quên mà bạc sen dâu mùa lòng ô tan giờ tóc sang chất 雨风吹就要唱水嘛。anh này cháu cao trước chẳng buồn我国家怎难安难着不 qua mà chấm cày trắng trôi dâu hương hoàng ngoài chế cũ yên hàng dâu chế thang ya mà yang sao bông ya châu á mi thăng
Wow. And that's in Weitou.
Yeah. So I don't know if you could recognize any words that sounded a bit like Cantonese.
I was trying to, but I guess what struck me is that it was so, or it is so harmonic.
Mm.
I think harmonic in the way that it reminds me of Cantopop and not atonal in the way Cantonese opera is.
Mm.
So before you sang it, I expected it to be more like atonal, like Cantonese opera, but actually it's not. It's very, very harmonic melody.
Yeah. To me, actually, what struck me when I first heard it, it reminded me of blues music.
Yes.
And what I've learned is that the actual lament melody or the motif follows this pentatonic minor scale, which again is very similar to blues music. And then the variations of the laments come through the lyrics, really. So the melody is pretty standard. You can think about it as like a jazz standard, maybe, but then the words are changed and varied from girl to girl. They can inject new lines in there, different personal experiences, different landscapes if they've lived in a different village. And so yeah, what I find interesting is that there is this, I guess, overarching melody that keeps coming back. I see it as a sort of haunting melody, and I just find it so beautiful. I found it so touching when I first heard it. But those lyrics I just sang was talking about a catfish is in foreign lands and the catfish has a flat head, right? So when it buries its head in the mud, it gets all the mud up and so it's like murky. And then my favorite line is about this eel. The eel doesn't have scales, it's really slippery. And the word for scale, you, you, is also a homophone for neighbor in Weitou.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, it's lon, like
Mm.
go, like
Yeah.
your neighbor. So the eel doesn't have scales, but at the same time, she's saying she doesn't have any friends or neighbors. So there's this many things like that that you just kind of go, oh wow, these women didn't go to school, they didn't have a formal education, they couldn't even write, they couldn't read or write, which I feel like actually very connected to because I can hardly read or write Chinese. I'm like, this is why I can learn these songs. And to have that, yeah, complexity in the illusions and metaphors is quite astounding. And I think within the community itself, especially the men, they just think, oh, those songs are rubbish. Like those songs are just silliness. And still that sentiment still exists, right? What really inspired me and fueled me was to be like, okay, I really want to learn these songs in a way, inherit these songs from these women as someone with this background myself and with, I guess, the privilege of being away. You know, sometimes when you're in the diaspora and you have a bit more space and distance, you actually have a bit more perspective of how precious things are because it's not just all around you.
It's an external perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And so that kind of started my journey to learn these songs. And then after learning quite a few of them and becoming not only more comfortable singing them, I felt like they literally changed the fabric of my voice. They found their way into the new music that I write, which is crazy. And I feel like my voice itself has matured in this way. The grain and the tone of it has changed by singing these songs. The first time I sang the songs, I felt like goosebumps all over me. And I really felt like that my voice was one with all the women before me as well. It just kind of had this very magical, almost, yeah, quasi-spiritual quality when I started singing it. And so, yeah, I've been writing new songs as well, inspired by these.
And how does your mom feel when she hears the music that you are singing that is from her ancestors.
Yeah, well, she's quite overwhelmed, and actually, to it's a little bit funny because when my mum was growing up, the bridal lament ritual was no more because arranged marriages wasn't being practiced anymore. So
Right.
this ritual, along with the ritual disappearing, the songs disappeared. But what my mum did hear as a young person was when the very similar songs were being sung in a wailing kind of way at funerals. So her association with this style of music was at funerals. And so when I first started singing these songs, she was like, "Oh my goodness, stop singing. It's really scary. I just keep thinking about all these women around the coffin. Please stop singing." So it took her a while to learn as well and to realize that, oh my goodness, there's actually so much complexity. And yeah, she's even said herself, she's like, "I can't believe this." Like for me, I always just, as soon as I hear that sound, I switch off because it's too scary for me. But now I actually, it's incredible that you've been able, like my daughter has been able to reteach me these songs. And so I mean, I see it as a very collaborative situation where mum is almost, it's like she's like a translator, a cultural consultant, and I just teach her the melody, and then she's like, "Oh yes, yes, yes." And what's incredible is like, apart from the ritual songs, there's also just the everyday songs. There's lullabies, there's working songs, there's funny songs, there's joke songs. And to think the lullaby that my grandma would have sung to my mum can now potentially sing to my future child. I'm like, okay, this is a good project.
This is so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us on the Schoolroom Rainbow. Please check out Rainbow Chan's new album that we've been talking about, The Bridal Lament, and visit her website, chunyingrainbowchan.com, to learn more and stay up to date with her cultural practice and activities. Rainbow, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people, the continuing custodians of this land called Sydney in Australia. We invite you all to reflect on the territories that you're on and the host nations, and pay respect to elders, past, present, and emerging. To learn more about the Chinese Canadian Museum and book tickets, visit us at ChineseCanadianMuseum.ca and follow us on Instagram at ccmuseumbc for updates. The Schoolroom is presented by the Chinese Canadian Museum, hosted by Dr. Melissa Carmen Lee and produced by Rosalie Gonawan. Production is supported by Noah Taylor. The theme music and original audio was created by Joshua Young, and graphic design is by Studio Pian Pian He and Max Harvey. Stay tuned for next month's episode of The Schoolroom, available wherever you get your podcasts.